This week marks the 40th anniversary of the Vietnam War. A somber anniversary with a high cost, 58,000 dead Americans. The Pentagon expected to spend millions on related events, even as protests have already begun. But now, let's fast forward 2 decades later to one woman who made it her life's work, bringing hope and triumph to the children of Vietnam. Christina Noble is the subject of a new biopic, and joining us now to share her story is the film's writer and director, Stephen Bradley. Thanks so much for joining us here today on Newsmax Now.
That's a pleasure, thanks.
So, can you tell us who exactly is Christina Noble, and what is it about her that inspired you to make this film?
Christina Noble is an Irish woman. She's still alive. She's 70 and she's still very much working in Vietnam. As a child, she had a really tough childhood in Ireland, which included homelessness. And she had a dream in her 20s, literally a dream, that she should go to Vietnam for some reason. After she'd brought up her own children, she went to Vietnam in 1989 and discovered that her destiny was to look after street children. And since then, she has helped over 700,000 street children in Vietnam and also in Mongolia. The reason that I wanted to tell the story is that it's the most extraordinary story, and we've screened the film right across the States in festivals, and the reaction constantly is, this is an amazing story, how come we haven't heard it, even in the context of Vietnam? And so what I say to them is, it is an extraordinary story, and here it is. That's why I made the film.
Stephen Bradley, thanks so much for joining us. We apologize, but we do have some breaking news that we need to let our viewers know about right now. We'll come to you as soon as we can.
All right, and here is President Obama again speaking. He's talking about Baltimore right now. Let's listen to the president speaking about this.
Destroying and undermining businesses and opportunities in their own communities that rob jobs and opportunity from people in that area. So it is entirely appropriate that the mayor of Baltimore, who I spoke to yesterday, and the governor, who I spoke to yesterday, work to stop that kind of senseless violence and destruction. That is not a protest. That is not a statement. It's people, a handful of people taking advantage of a situation for their own purposes, and they need to be treated as criminals. Point number 4, the violence that happened yesterday distracted from the fact that you had seen multiple days of peaceful protests that were focused on entirely legitimate concerns of these communities in Baltimore, led by clergy and community leaders, and they were constructive and they were thoughtful, and frankly didn't get that much attention. And one burning building will be looped on television over and over and over again, and the thousands of demonstrators who did it the right way, I think, have been lost in the discussion. The overwhelming majority of the community in Baltimore, I think, have handled this appropriately, expressing real concern and outrage over the possibility that our laws were not applied evenly in the case of Mr. Gray, and that accountability needs to exist. And I think we have to give them credit. My understanding is you've got some of the same organizers now going back into these communities to try to clean up in the aftermath of a handful of protesters, a handful of criminals and thugs who tore up the place. What they were doing, what those community leaders and clergy and others were doing, that is a statement. That's the kind of organizing that needs to take place if we're going to tackle this problem, and they deserve credit for it, and we should be lifting them up. Point number 5, and I've got 6, because this is important. Since Ferguson and the task force that we put together, we have seen too many instances of what appears to be police officers interacting with individuals, primarily African American, often poor, in ways that raise troubling questions. And it comes up, it seems like, once a week now, or once every couple of weeks. And so I think it's pretty understandable why the leaders of civil rights organizations, but more importantly, moms and dads across the country might start saying this is a crisis. What I'd say is this has been a slow-rolling crisis. This has been going on for a long time. This is not new, and we shouldn't pretend that it's new. The good news is that perhaps there's some newfound awareness because of social media and video cameras and so forth that there are problems and challenges when it comes to how policing and our laws are applied in certain communities, and we have to pay attention to it and respond. What's also good news is the task force that was made up of law enforcement and community activists that we brought together here in the White House have come up with very constructive, concrete proposals that, if adopted by local communities and by states and by counties, by law enforcement generally, would make a difference. Wouldn't solve every problem, but would make a concrete difference in rebuilding trust and making sure that the overwhelming majority of effective, honest, and fair law enforcement officers, that they're able to do their job better because it will weed out or retrain or put a stop to those handful who may be not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, the challenge for us as the federal government is that we don't run these police forces. I can't federalize every police force in the country and force them to retrain, but what I can do is to start working with them collaboratively so that they can begin this process of change themselves. And coming out of the task force that we put together, we're now working with local communities. Department of Justice has just announced a grant program for those jurisdictions that want to purchase body cameras. We are going to be issuing grants for those jurisdictions that are prepared to start trying to implement some of the new training and data collection and other things that can make a difference. And we're going to keep on working with those local jurisdictions so that they can begin to make the changes that are necessary. I think it's going to be important for organizations like the Fraternal Order Police and other police unions and organizations to acknowledge that this is not good for police. We have to own up to the fact that occasionally there are going to be problems here, just as there are in every other occupation. There are some bad politicians who are corrupt. There are folks in the business community or on Wall Street who don't do the right thing. Well, there's some police who aren't doing the right thing. And rather than close ranks, what we've seen is a number of thoughtful police chiefs and commissioners and others recognize they got to get their arms around this thing and work together with the community to solve the problem. And we're committed to facilitating that process. So the heads of our COPS agency that helps with community policing, they're already out in Baltimore. Our head assistant attorney general for the Civil Rights Division is already out in Baltimore. But we're going to be working systematically with every city and jurisdiction around the country to try to help them implement some solutions that we know work. And I'll make my final point. I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, but this was a pretty important issue for us. We can't just leave this to the police. I think there are police departments that have to do some soul searching. I think there's some communities that have to do some soul searching. But I think we as a country have to do some soul searching. This is not new. It's been going on for decades. And without making any excuses for criminal activities that take place in this community, what we also know is that if you have impoverished communities that have been stripped away of opportunity, where children are born into abject poverty, they've got parents.
Well, there you go. President Obama speaking twice, saying in the last 10 minutes or so that this issue we're seeing in Baltimore, the video, the techniques for covering it might be new, but the problems themselves are not new. And also interesting, Miranda, there in the last few minutes, President Obama specifically addressing police departments across this country, saying they need to do some soul searching, as does the community. But he mentioned police departments first, talking about police corruption in certain communities that needs to be addressed, also talking about political corruption tied to all this as well.
But then stressing enough that, you know, he does not have the power to federalize these police departments. He can assist them in whatever way possible, but stressing that, again, like you said, soul searching. Last night, I mean, 144 cars were just destroyed last night or hit. And again, this all happened mid-afternoon. It all started mid-afternoon. There you're looking at it. Right there. 19 officers were injured. One supposedly still, last we checked, was in the trauma center.
Yeah, and the president, again, using words like senseless, not appropriate, and also highlighting the fact that these violent protests, the looting, the riots, has been overshadowing the peaceful protests, which we've also seen in Baltimore. But of course, you cannot pay as much attention to the peaceful protests when there are police officers being assaulted on the street. But again, I did find it interesting. President Obama saying that he wants to work with local police departments. He wants to collaborate with local police departments, but he can't federalize local police departments.
And all we keep thinking about is the Department of Justice, and Loretta Lynch was just sworn in.
Yeah. I guess today is her first full day on the job. We will learn a lot about Loretta Lynch and how she plans on dealing with these types of situations, if there's going to be any difference from Eric Holder's Justice Department.
But again, the governor, we heard from the governor earlier today, National Guard has been called in. There is a curfew set for today, so hopefully we've seen the last of it, although I wouldn't place any bets on that right now. The way things have been going over the past several months in Ferguson and New York, and now here in Baltimore.
Today,
we heard Bob Harvey talk about this. Feels like I'm looking at, takes him back to 1968.
And again, I don't know if Bob would agree with President Obama about a lot of things, but that does hit on that point the president made, that this is not new. The anger, the emotions that we're seeing with this new generation are in many ways the same that it has been through prior generations. The difference now is what is going to be done. Is anything going to be done? We've seen the failures of institutions in the city. These rioters obviously feel like they have been failed in some way, rightly or wrongly.
It'll be interesting to see how everything transpires. Hopefully some peace will come to Baltimore. Again, that is what the mother is asking. Everyone started rioting because of what happened to Freddie Gray.
Yeah.
And the mother is now asking for peace.
Well, we'll see what happens. I know there's going to be a reaction to what the president said. And again, we're quoting here, rather than close ranks, we've seen a number of thoughtful police chiefs recognize that they've got to get their arms around this thing. President Obama doesn't have the best relationship with police, at least the police officers that I know. Is this going to help or hurt things? We'll see.
Let's see. And now we want to go back to Stephen Bradley, I believe. Are you back with us? Sorry, Stephen, we had to interrupt you for that breaking news with the president joining us in the Rose Garden. But let's go back again. I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about the film again. It's a very inspiring story about an Irish woman who is still alive today. If you could, let's backtrack a little bit. Let's talk about her specifically and what drew her to Vietnam.
What drew her to Vietnam was that when she was in her 20s, she had this very strong dream, literally a dream in her sleep, that told her she should go to Vietnam. And she waited until she brought up her own children, and in 1989 went to Vietnam, not really knowing why, and discovered this huge problem with street children living on the streets, and has since then saved and helped over 700,000 street children. But the most remarkable thing about her is that she has a love of music and humor, and she uses that to kind of energize her work in Vietnam.
Now, Stephen, when you say that she went over there and helped over 7,000 children, what exactly was she doing?
700,000
Oh,
children.
700,000.
So she has set up
big difference. Thank you for clarifying that.
700,000. Big difference.
Big difference.
And from small beginnings, she set up one center in Saigon, which is a health center and also a school, and also houses some children. She's since set up 100 projects across Vietnam, be it a kindergarten in the middle of the Mekong Delta in the jungle, or a school for the blind, or many other projects.
And
so
now
she's had a huge impact on the country.
And now you've done a film about her life. Let's real quickly, in the time that we have remaining, let's talk about the Christina Noble Foundation. What can you tell us about it?
People can look at our website, thenoblemovie.com, and that will show them the trailer and also lead them to links about the foundation. So the foundation is an ongoing enterprise to help children both in Mongolia and in Vietnam, and she's obviously at the forefront of this. And I suppose the story of the movie tells how that foundation came about, but really goes back to her early life and shows why she has been able to deal with street children in Vietnam, which is that she was homeless herself in Dublin in the 1960s.
Now, real quickly, we only have like 10 seconds remaining, but if you were going to tell people in one sentence why they should go out and see this film, what would it be?
Because it's an extraordinary story and it's uplifting and inspiring despite the hardship. There's also humor and a lot of music in the film.
Well, you definitely have inspired us. Thank you for joining us here on Newsmax Now. Good to have you.